Welcome to Thoughtfully Mindless. My guest in this episode is Dominik Jirák. Dominik is a 27-year-old from Slovakia who graduated last year from university with a degree in economics and management. He's currently working as an HR consultant, and he wrote a book called Economic Ignorance, which is currently being translated to English. He runs the Instagram account under the handle PraxEcon, where he talks about philosophy, politics, and economics. And he recently started posting on Twitter too under the handle PraxEcon1. We have a great conversation around politics, economics, philosophy, and more. I hope you enjoy the conversation. And with that, let's welcome Dominik. Dominik, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
So why don't you go into a little bit of your background? First of all, you're in Slovakia. Yeah, dive into that. Tell listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So, I'm from Slovakia. Last year, I'm 27 right now. Last year, I graduated college. I studied economics and management at one of Slovakian universities, and throughout my studies is where I came to economics more deeply. In one of our classes, I stumbled upon the past thinkers, like Friedrich August von Hayek, and that got me into the Austrian School of Economics. Um, so that's why I have been able to enjoy my studies more. And I guess you've already seen my Instagram account. I'm trying to post some economic stuff, that I learned in college and also by myself. Yeah. So basically, I enjoy economics, and all the other disciplines that are also important when one is trying to get to know more about economics. You know, but other than that, I enjoy my free time. In my free time, I'm trying to work out, going to gym. I do boxing. I like nature. I like reading books, also guitar. Yeah, basically.
Awesome. With schooling, is it similar to the US? You have like K through 12 and then university? Same thing?
Yeah, basically we have a primary school, then we have high school, and after that you can choose to go to college. But the question about college is different than in America. I We have 3 years for bachelor's degree, and then 2 more years for master's degree. Yeah, and after that you can also continue doing your doctorate, PhD, which is 3 years. Yeah, I guess in the USA the length of specific level is a little bit different, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's like 4 years for bachelor's degree, 2 more years for master's, and then typically 8 years total for a doctorate, so 4 years
Yeah.
after a bachelor's. So,
Hmm.
it varies though. Obviously, people
Yeah.
can do things a little bit faster or slower.
Hmm.
Um, what got you interested in economics? What made you major in that?
Actually, after high school, I started the law school, but I haven't been able to enjoy that. After 1 year, 2 semesters, I decided to quit. I decided to enroll in economics and management, which I thought would be more easier and more enjoyable for me.
Do you have any long-term goals with it? Like,
At the moment, at the point when I decided to change my program, change my field of study, I absolutely didn't know where it would get me. I was just looking for the way to obtain my degree, to
yeah.
graduate college, and that was it. It was only
Okay.
later when I really got to enjoy economics. Yeah.
Hmm. In the US, there's a phenomenon going on. I mean, it's been going on for a little while now, but a lot of people get degrees and
Mhm.
then they don't have many job prospects afterward. You know, we're sold the dream of, you go to school and then you get a good job. Is it similar where you're at, or what's the job prospects like? And I'm sure it depends on the degree you get too.
Totally, totally. It depends on the degree, but I would say it's very similar here in Slovakia.
Okay.
You know, many people think that once they graduate college, once they obtain their degree, they would get open doors for for their dream job, which is
Yeah.
really not the case. You know,
Yeah.
right now we can say that I'm working in the field that I majored in. But it
Yeah.
took me months and months of searching, for the job. And I also know about friends that are still searching after one
Yeah.
year of graduating. So I would say that it's very similar to the US. Yeah,
Yeah. So you were in school when COVID happened.
yeah, that's right.
What was that like at the university you were at?
I mean, it was pretty same as elsewhere. We were doing hybrid system. One time we were in school in person, and one time we were just learning through Teams.
Yeah.
And it's been going for quite a long time actually. All the
Okay.
all the lectures, and exams also. It was it was definitely interesting. Yeah.
Was it harder for people or about the same?
Um, it's really hard to say because there have been some pros and also cons of this system.
Yeah.
But on the average, I would say that um, the whole experiment with this kind of thing brought more cons than pros, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Um, with COVID, you wrote a book. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired that and how that went?
Yeah, sure. Um, so when the COVID happened, I I was just uh, I was just starting to get into economics more deeply. You know, I there were still some things which I learned about, and which I didn't understand. You know, I only understand them in retrospect. You know, but at that time, and also maybe 2021, 2022, I um, I really got into the economics more, and all this other
Mm,
stuff. And I saw what the COVID policies did to the economy, to the society. You know, there have been also some other socioeconomic problems that have been haunting the society long before COVID. And
yeah.
I was just, there have been so much miscommunication, so much misinformation about all the problems that I just got tired of this. I thought that maybe I can
Yeah.
write about this, and if someone asks me anything, or if I engage in conversation about this kind of stuff, I can just say that, you know, um, I wrote about this. You can read it, and I was just looking to uh, teach, lay people, normal people which don't know anything about this. I was just
Yeah.
trying to clearly explain what the roots of the problems are, what are the possible solutions, and that's
Yeah.
it, basically.
Well, I think it's awesome that you wrote a book at your age. Like, that's very impressive. Um,
Thanks.
can you give some details about your views on the COVID? Like, my view is, I think the things that were implemented to take care of COVID, to mitigate the harm of COVID, probably
Yeah.
did more harm than COVID did. Um, Like shutting down economies was
Mhm.
horrible, in my opinion. Um, I was telling friends this at the time. Um, I think small businesses are vital to economies, and they care more about their local communities. So I think we should care more about small businesses. And it seems like, or I, I think it's obvious that small businesses were hurt way more than the big businesses were. Amazon did just fine during COVID. Actually, they did way better than they normally do because the businesses that were closed down, everyone just went to Amazon and the other big stores that you can just buy from online that the small businesses just weren't set up for. So, why don't you share a little bit about what you think?
Definitely. Basically, I have the same view as you. Um, when the COVID happened, we didn't know about the possible outcomes of chosen policies. I get that we as people we are choosing in um, limited amount of knowledge. We don't know the all possible outcomes of our actions. I get that, but on the other hand, we should be able to look at also the implicit costs of all our actions. And as you said, the chosen policies which the government chose around the world sometimes did more harm than good. And that's
Mhm.
actually uh, the first three chapters of my set book are about this, are about
Yeah,
COVID, are about the chosen policies, and how these chosen policies were at the end of the day the worse. You know, um, yeah. About small businesses, yeah, they were hurt the most. The big businesses did just fine, but now we are in 2023. It all happened in 2020, 2021. And now even the big businesses have felt the shock of these policies because of inflation, because of thinning of profit margins. We are nowadays we are all worse off because of these chosen policies 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
yeah.
Definitely.
Oh, I think we saw pretty big problems with globalization too. Like, we were heavily reliant on, at least in the US, and I'm sure many other countries had the same situation. We were heavily reliant on countries like China for medicines and supplies. And I think one of the big problems with that is when there's an emergency and every country needs supplies,
Yeah.
it's only natural that the country with the supplies is gonna take care of its own people first, leaving everyone else that's relying on those countries or that country to get whatever is left over.
I would certainly agree. And you mentioned China. China is currently and has been for many many years the supplier, not only for America but for the whole world. It all started in China. China tried to implement these interventionist policies, these restrictive policies as soon as possible. It shut down their harbors, it shut down their production. The stuff hasn't been produced for a long time. That's when the bottlenecks happened. That's when the restriction of the supply happened. It all served as a big supply shock to the
Yeah,
whole world. It basically started the whole rising of the prices. But when we speak about the price rises, we cannot forget about the the trillions of dollars and euros printed in such a short span of time. It it
yeah,
definitely it definitely had a big influence on the price rises that we see nowadays.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a price inflation and then there's monetary inflation. And monetary inflation, as far as I can tell, heavily influences price inflation. I mean, it seems only natural. Like if you're printing more dollars or euros, you're going to have to increase prices eventually. Like prices are naturally going to go up because the money's value is just going to keep decreasing as you keep printing. So, what are the things that, in your opinion, could have been done differently? Like, what are some things that could have been done differently with COVID to have mitigated some of the issues that we saw?
Um, that's a good question. It's really easy to be to have solutions after such a thing already happened, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that the governments at the time were, the governments are considered as the most competent entities out there. The politicians, governments, public sectors, healthcare institutions should have looked on the implicit costs of their chosen policies. That's a fact, I think, because if they continue to be such irresponsible, people, then we are all doomed, basically. So I don't think the chosen policies, chosen monetary policies, were good, you know. Um, and like you said, we have uh, we have had monetary inflation, which heavily influenced the current price rises. You know, the
Yeah.
the amount of dollars that has been printed in such a short time, it was just astounding. I think around 30% of all the dollars ever created were created in in the span of 1.5 year. 2020,
Yeah.
2021. This kind of shock is bound to have heavy influence on price inflation. Yeah. And
Yeah.
this, many good economists have been warning about this at the time. It seems like nobody was paying attention to these economists. Many, not only Austrian economists, but also other schools have been warning about this. I guess the majority of people have been just afraid of the COVID, afraid of the slowing of the economy. They did, in their eyes, they did what was desirable to do, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and even nowadays, these people don't feel like they did something wrong, you know. And until now, there have been any sorts of repercussions, any sorts of discussions about the chosen policies, as far as I know. We are
Yeah.
all acting like everything that happened was good. All the chosen policies.
Yeah. It seems like people want to just move past it. Like, let's forget about it. Let's forget about it. Let's move past it. But mistakes were definitely made. And if we just move past it, then there's going to be another pandemic eventually. Like it's just naturally going to happen or going to happen because of some accident. And we're just going to repeat the same behaviors if we don't reflect on it and figure out what went wrong. I think one of the things that we could have done a lot better is looked at the data for how COVID was actually affecting people. Like we know that it primarily like the people who got hit hardest were the elderly populations, and children and young people, healthy people didn't really have many issues with it. Don't get me wrong, some people did still. Like I know people who weren't very old that did have issues with COVID, but it seems like it would have been better to have more vulnerable people shelter and stay away from public places while everyone else went about their normal lives. That way the virus could have spread among the population of people who were healthy and can handle it. And once herd immunity kind of kicked in for everyone else, then the elderly and more vulnerable people could have come out and have been less at risk at that point, and then we wouldn't have all that economic destruction that we saw.
Yes, definitely. I mean, like you said, not to diminish the destructive power of the COVID virus per se. It's been real. It's real. It's a real disease. You know, many people died. Many people have been
Yeah,
struggling uh, with long COVID, long after their, you know, they caught the COVID. We
yeah,
cannot forget about this. Of course not. But
definitely.
yeah, the people are dying also from other sources than COVID. People are struggling with other problems than COVID. We
Yeah,
totally forgot about all the other problems that people face. You know, the governments declared the war on COVID, basically. You know that there have been some gestures about solidarity, about, you know, we need to stick together, we need to do whatever it takes to beat COVID, basically. But
yeah,
whatever it takes is not the correct kind of solution. And,
yeah,
you know, never, because the human life and also economics teaches about this. There are no final solutions on this world, only trade-offs. Like the economist Thomas Sowell said, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. You know, if we choose to shut down the economy, to print billions of dollars and euros, and to fight COVID and to stay at home, to close businesses, we can choose
yeah,
that as a society, but we need to be prepared for the undesirable consequences of these actions. And these undesirable consequences of our actions were kind of well known, you know, at the time, I think, because we have the whole human history to look at, and many of these restrictionist policies have been applied in the history with the subsequent undesirable actions, consequences. I mean,
yeah,
so it's really bad. It's really irresponsible to be saying that we didn't know what our actions would bring. I think that's not correct. You know,
yeah.
well, the governments should have been more more open to dissenting views and opinions in the society. There have been many other opinions, but they chose to ignore them. They chose to persecute these people and look at, you know, how the society, how the world is doing right now.
Yeah, I think it's a big problem when you let fear dictate decisions too. And I agree with you. I think it's naive to believe that we didn't know better. Like, I hear people say that quite a bit, like, "Well, we didn't know at the time what the repercussions of these decisions would be," but the reality is many people were raising their voices. They were just being shut out by everyone else. They were being ignored because fear was the priority.
Yeah, exactly.
In the US, we have not had many major threats to our freedom, especially from foreign governments. We haven't had that. In Slovakia, you guys have in more recent history. And I was kind of alarmed by the things I saw being said. I knew one person who was all about masks and lockdowns, and he mocked freedom. He called it free dumb, like stupid. And I thought it was such a ridiculous thing to say because I'm thinking you're mocking the very thing that allows you to mock it. Like, without that freedom, you can't make it that joke. Like, you don't have the freedom to
Yeah.
speak your opinion and call people stupid for not doing what you want to do. And I I'm wondering, in Slovakia, is there more of a connection to the need to freedom? Like, do people appreciate freedom more there, or was it kind of the same?
It's a very good question because when we look at the recent history, just 30 something years ago, Slovakia has been communist under the
Yeah.
communist rule. And one would expect in such a country that people would be more inclined to freedom, to liberty. But I wouldn't say it's such a uh, it's such an easy thing to say. There are still many people which remember communism. You know, communism is a total disease in the history has been. It's a totalitarian thing, totalitarian system, but since there are many people which remember that, and they kind of are choosing to remember only the good, they ignore the bad things about that, and many people have been happy throughout communism, I think, because communism, on the other hand, allows you to have less responsibility
Mm.
for your life, for your family. You know, once the government, once the society, once the state dictates your life, it can be more of it can be good for some people. They have
Yeah.
less responsibility. They they are just following in the steps that the government already chose for them. And I think it's still a thing nowadays in all post-communist countries around us, in especially in the Eastern Europe. You know, I think we can see this kind of thing. So to put that into perspective of the COVID, actually think it was the same as elsewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, some people have been really outspoken about this issue. They have been um, more inclined to freedom, and some people just chose to follow the mainstream narrative. But I think we need to consider the all sides of things. It's okay to follow the mainstream narrative. I think it's okay to protect yourself. You know, but it's also okay to raise the questions, about the loss of freedom, the loss of liberty. And
Yeah.
if you choose to not follow the mainstream narrative, I think you should be allowed to do that. I don't think silencing this opposition and monopolizing the communication and information in the state is the correct way. And that's why we see so many problems nowadays. Another thing has been also, once you raised some kind of questions, you have been immediately labeled as a conspiracy theorist, by the
Mm.
mainstream narrative, by all the people around you. I think this, is such a big problem, because um, you can just be for freedom, liberty. You can just be raising questions, questioning the authority, and not be a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
But we live in a society, we live in the world where this kind of thing is considered radical and conspirational, basically. And it doesn't apply only to COVID, but also other socioeconomic problems. Yeah.
Yeah. You touched on a few important things there. One I would like to talk about for a quick second is conspiracy theories. Like, I think this has become a derogatory term, a bad term, when most conspiracy theorists, while they can get extreme and believe things that are just obviously not true, I don't think there's anything wrong with looking into things and questioning the main narrative. And it seems like the term conspiracy theorist has been captured and used as a derogatory term to, to silence people and keep people in line, not questioning things. But when you have that, then you just have governments and entities running without accountability, and they can just brush you off as a conspiracy theorist. But I mean, some of the conspiracy theories, things that were labeled as conspiracy theories at the beginning of COVID or during COVID turned out to be true. Like the virus being coming from a lab, leaking from a lab in the Wuhan lab. Like that seems like the most plausible source of it at this point, you know? And it was plausible at the beginning, but people who were suggesting that were called conspiracy theorists. And then people who questioned in the US, we had 2 weeks to slow the curve or something like that.
Mm.
And people were doubting that it was going to be 2 weeks. People believed that it was going to be longer. And they were labeled conspiracy theorists. And the reality is they were just sensible people that understand government doesn't relinquish power once you give it to it. Like government, it's not in the nature of government to say, okay, thanks for giving us this power. Here you go, here's it back. And that actually ties into communism a little bit because some people believe that communism has never actually come to fruition because they believe that true communism is when there's this point in communism that the state is no longer needed and that one day the state will just relinquish control to the citizens and then you have this communist utopia with no government anymore because it's not needed. And I think it's kind of an asinine uh theory. It's fantasy in my opinion to believe that any government is one day going to say, "Hey, we're no longer needed. You guys you can handle this all on your own. You got it." The reality is like government is a business, right? Like they have careers, they have paychecks that they're generating from it. They have perks that they get from running the government, from being in these positions of power. And it's nonsensical to believe that one day in any system, whether it be communism, capitalism, whatever, it's nonsensical to believe that the government will relinquish its power. That's why representative democracies are so important because people need a say in how things happen.
Yeah, totally. Totally. It's wishful thinking, exactly like you said. And it looks like almost that you read my book because this is the kind of thing that I also mention in one of the chapters about communism and capitalism. This is exactly what I basically said. The book is still in Slovak, so that's not there is no way that you read it, but yeah. I just wanted to return a little back. Someone said, that it's been a popular person, maybe past American president, I don't know, but there is nothing more permanent than a temporary government program.
Yeah.
And I think it also applies to COVID. It also applies to other government programs. But to go to communism, yes, exactly. I don't know why people are so naive as to think that these new leaders, or these new communist leaders, would just relinquish their new power just like that. It hasn't happened throughout history. It will never happen. Once you put people in such a position with so much power, they are not going to give it up. You know,
Yeah.
Stalin didn't, Lenin didn't. You know, nobody will. But it's also true that communist thinkers and enthusiasts are saying that the real communism hasn't been attained until now. I think that's true because Karl Marx was teaching the same thing. The only real communism would be without the state, without the
Yeah.
classes. It would be a beautiful world to live in. People would just work for the sake of working. They would do many things. Like fish in the morning, hunt in the afternoon, and be thinkers in the evening. This was without any class wars, without any struggles. This is utopian at best, this is just utopia.
Yeah.
And there have been some, um, you know, people have been trying to achieve this communism, I think, but it is always bound to fail because in the, on the way to real communism, you just get, you just get, you just get socialism, you just get totalitarianism, you just get oppression of civil liberties, human rights, and this is the kind of thing that we want to impoverish the world, to kill millions of people to achieve the real communism. Yeah,
Yeah, it's one of the problems with utopian thinking because
yeah,
if you're if you truly believe, and I don't actually think that everyone that supports communism believes the utopia is possible. I think there's some people just want the control and want to be at the head of a certain political movement. And then I think there are mostly the masses that believe communism is good. They're fooled into thinking that the utopia is somehow possible. And the problem with utopian thinking is when you're pursuing something that you see as like some kind of paradise, some utopia, that's when anything is on the table for achieving it. And that's why you see so much destruction along the way because they justify it. It's the end justifies the means, kind of a Machiavellian mindset of, yeah, I know people are going to die now, but it's going to be so much better once we get there. But the problem is that never comes. The end never comes. So all you have is the destruction on the way to a fantasy that can never be realized.
exactly. Like Stalin said, it doesn't matter how many eggs you break, as long as we achieve our end. It doesn't matter how many millions will die, as long as we achieve our end.
Yeah.
And like you said, this utopian end can never be achieved because we live in the world of limitations, limited resources, limited scarce resources, the limited time, limited knowledge, limited human knowledge. There is no
Yeah.
way that a person or a group of persons, group of people can know everything about the whole economy, about the whole world. This kind of thinking, I think, originated many hundred years ago, and it's been culminated also um, in French Revolution, in one of those other more radical groups. They have been trying to achieve the ideal solution, the ideal perfect world, and this can never happen because our world that we live in is not ideal. It can never be. There are only trade-offs. There are no final solutions. And
Yeah.
Friedrich August von Hayek called this the fatal conceit. Some people are so conceited, so ignorant, and so arrogant that they think they know just better. They know better. They know what's best for you and me, for the whole society. The problem
Hmm.
is that these kind of people get on top sometimes, you know, and somehow get the uh, gets to their side, other citizens, like what happened, in communist Russia, with Bolsheviks, and what happened also in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, there's a one of those limiting factors is human nature. There's a natural tendency toward corruption with humans to at least some degree. Like if you're in a position of power and you can bestow a little bit of extra benefit on a friend or a family member, a lot of people it's very tempting to do that. And the more power you have, the more favors you can do for yourself or for family and friends, and that's just human nature. Like that's why things like the US Constitution are meant to put restrictions on government. They're not power giving documents, they're power restricting documents. That's the ideal kind of constitution, is something that restricts power. And another thing with human nature is, you mentioned not having to make decisions or not being responsible for your decisions, as far as people who look positively on communism. And I think it doesn't matter if your situation is worse or better. If it's a bit worse, still the fact that you don't have to take responsibility for those decisions. You might be hungry, you might not be in good conditions, but the fact that it's not your fault has this tendency to be considered a positive thing in people's perspectives. Like, yeah, I'm hungry, we can have more, things could be better, but none of this is my fault. Versus in a free market, in a capitalist society, you have more freedom, you have more ability to influence your own conditions. And if you're in that same condition, or even a little bit better of a condition than you would be in a communist system, a bit more of that responsibility falls on your own head. And that's a little harder to take for people. Like, for you to be in a bad position and not be able to blame somebody else quite easily, that's, I think, a hard thing for people to handle.
Definitely, definitely. I agree with everything you just said. And that it is a big problem because people by nature, are bound to be responsible for themselves, for their families, and for their communities. But many people are just looking for the state, for the government to take care of for them. To take care of their
Mhm.
families, of them. And that was one of the things that many people view positively about communism, because yes, they were miserable, they were poor, but they could say that this is not my fault. This is just how the system works. you know but once you have more capitalistic society, more free market, you have more responsibility for you, and it's a very very difficult thing to grasp and to get over with, like you said. Exactly. That's why I think one of the greatest sociologist thinkers, Emil Durkheim, in the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century, studied the modern industrialist countries at that time. You know, they have they were all more or less free market, more or less capitalist
Mhm.
societies. He found that in these societies there have been more cases of suicide, more cases of miserability than in the societies that were not industrial, that were not capitalist. You know, um, many because in free market capitalism, you can see how almost everybody is doing better than you. But it's most of the time it's just an illusion. But some people don't know that the lives of their neighbors, the lives of their friends aren't that good. They are just presenting that they are doing good, they are successful. But the problem is that people are so affected by this. They see success all around them, and they can't take that they are doing relatively worse than their friends and other people. So, like you said, in more capitalistic society, you have more responsibility for you, for your life, for your family, and in more communist, more restrictive societies, you have less of this responsibility. But you have to realize, we have to realize what is better. Is it better to live in a totalitarian society where the government plans out the whole life for you, or is it better to live with more responsibility in more free society? The choice is pretty obvious for me.
Yeah, same here. Um, could you explain a little bit about what Austrian economics is. We mentioned it a few times, but can you explain for anyone that might not be familiar, what is Austrian economics? What is Keynesian economics? What do most people experience in the world? Yeah, explain a little bit about those and maybe a little bit about your personal philosophy.
Yes, okay. So the Austrian School of Economics is considered pretty radical nowadays because mainly because it advocates for free market, for personal liberty and such. I won't get into the the technical details of this school, like their preferred method, scientific method, which is more grounded in theoretical knowledge. But the Austrian School of Economics, I think, is far superior to all the other schools of economics that are out there. It's just so consistent, so clear to grasp the economic principles and workings of the market. It's really the best in my opinion. But nowadays, the Keynesian school of economics prevails. It's considered more of the mainstream, and basically Keynesian economics, called after Keynes. One of the greatest economics thinkers of all time. It's basically the interventionist policies into the workings of the free market. And this also, like we talked about, governments like to think that they know best, and they have the tools to hamper with the free market through central bank, through setting of interest rates, through printing money, through regulations, through tariffs, taxes, and so on. So basically, Austrian School of Economics opposes all this because it believes that we can achieve the prosperity, the rise of wealth through free market and not interventionist policies. And that's basically what differentiates Austrian School of Economics from the mainstream School of Economics, which is heavily influenced by Keynesian policies. Nowadays, all the economists that get attention are basically mainstream. They advocate for more interventions from the side of government, and I think that's why they get the attention. They are politically correct. It's not political correct to advocate for less government because
Yeah.
you are considered as a radical, that you want an anarchy. So that's why the Austrian School of Economics is so ridiculed, I would say. And
Yeah.
yeah, I got into the Austrian School of Economics when I was studying, at college. In one of my classes called Economic Sociology, I stumbled upon Friedrich August von Hayek. I bought his books, also books from Ludwig von Mises and other Austrian, thinkers and economists. And I learned that there is some additional alternatives to the mainstream narrative, basically. Yeah, and I think these principles should be more known to general population, because once the general population knows about these basic economic principles, I think they are less apt to believe what the government is saying. You know, I don't think we need central planning in the monetary sphere. But the reality is that every country has a central bank. Central bank chooses arbitrarily the interest rates. It messes up
Yeah.
the price system, and basically the Austrian School of Economics advocates that there be no central banks, and that we should leave free market alone, and free market has self-corrective mechanisms, basically. So that's the main thing that differentiates
Yeah.
Austrian School of Economics from nowadays the mainstream school.
So it seems like Bitcoin, people that support Bitcoin, are more aligned with Austrian economics because they want something that has a fixed supply and they don't like the printing. And in my opinion, central banks are horrible for the world. One of the reasons that we see so much war, and one of the things that I believe enables war, is the fact that governments can print money from thin air. They can print more money because war is not profitable. And the broken window paradox or parable, where it's to kind of show that war is not profitable, but do Keynesian economists believe that war is profitable?
Some of them certainly do. You know, once such a catastrophe happens, uh, you can count on some people advocating for this, the broken
Yeah.
window parable, the fallacy. They will say that the war and also some natural catastrophes, disasters will create maybe some jobs and so on, which is totally not true. Because these new jobs and new opportunities, we live in a world of limited resources, scarce resources. And once you use these resources in the sphere of war, of waging war and killing people and manufacturing weapons, tanks, and so on, and destroying all these resources along the way, you basically grab these resources from the other spheres of the economy where they cannot be utilized. They have
Yeah.
been they have been destroyed. They have been destroyed in war and so on. So let's just get into more details. Bastiat, a French economist in the 19th century, pointed very clearly to this fallacy. That there have been some boy who destroyed window on the street, and some people were saying that, oh, that's good because the person that fixes this window will get money. And many people are agreeing with this type of thinking, because if the window wasn't broken, hasn't been broken, then maybe the owner of this shop, of this window, would keep the money for himself.
Yeah.
People believe that money needs to be spent immediately. That's what keeps the economy afloat. But we need to look at the value of this money. The value of this money that this money brings to this shop owner. He could have used this money in other alternative ways. He could buy himself a coat or new shoes. And because of the window, because of the broken window, he doesn't have new shoes, he doesn't have new coats. He only has the window that hasn't been broken before, was broken, and needs to be repaired. This is the
Yeah.
same with war. This is the same with catastrophe, natural disasters, and such. When you have financial international help, or humanitarian help to countries that have been struck with disasters, these resources come from somewhere. You can just magically print real resources, only money, and money is just paper that you buy the real resources with, and then you get price inflation, basically. So the broken
Yeah.
window fallacy, it's a bullshit.
Yeah. To go further into that, so your kid breaks a window, and what I guess the Keynesian economists would believe is stimulating the economy because the person who fixes the window has work to do. But in reality, there's time. That work being done on the window is work that could have been done somewhere else. So that person fixing the window could have been putting a brand new window on an extension of somebody's house that they're building. Um, and it's also short term. Like, let's say that that person wouldn't have a job that day without that window being broken. Well, it's short term thinking to believe that that window being broken is what is needed for him to have a job or him or her to have a job. Because when you zoom out a little bit, the market will adjust for things. So, like, if there's not a lot of windows being broken, not a lot of war as the um, parallel to that. If there's not a lot of windows being broken, the market adjusts, and that person who would be fixing the window might develop a different specialty. Or other people who fix windows would develop other specialties. So there's less competition for the window repair. And then that person can maintain their lifestyle fixing the windows remaining that because windows are going to sometimes break. There are things that need to be repaired. Um, so yeah, with that, I think it's just short-sighted to believe that you need a window to be broken to stimulate the economy. I agree completely that it's bullshit.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought short-term and long-term thinking because you always have to have in mind short-term consequences of your actions and also long-term consequences. The whole Keynesian economics and Keynesian policies are based on short-term thinking. How we stimulate the economy in the short term. Basically, and ignoring the long-term consequences. Keynes himself, in the 20th century, he said that forget about the long term. We have economic slowdown now. We have recession now, like in the 30s, when the Great Depression happened. But the problem with this type of thinking is that nowadays we are bearing the consequences of their short-term policies.
Yeah,
So where do we draw the line between short term and long term? Because short term can easily become long term in just the span of 3 years.
yeah,
Before 3 years, 3 years ago, the government chose short term thinking, Keynesian policies, stimulating the demand. But long term really happened quickly. And in 2022, 2023, we have been experiencing price inflation, restriction of the supply. Supply just couldn't catch the stimulated demand. There have been many, many bubbles throughout the whole economy. And it's really a miracle that the economy is so resilient because many
yeah,
economists have been saying that this couldn't last, but the economy nowadays is more resilient than we thought. So yeah, but it shouldn't come as a solution for this type of thing. The Keynesian policies are always wrong, and sometimes even in the short term, because they bring about undesired consequences in the eyes of the very same people that chose them. That applies to price fixation, that applies to tariffs, protectionism, and all the other interventionist policies, basically. Yeah, because
yeah,
let's just take an example from Hungary. Hungary chose to impose a price ceiling, fixation of the price of gasoline. So people, this stimulated the demand because once you are buying something for the lower price than is the market price, the market price would be higher. But the government chose the lower price, and Hungary felt the consequences of this because there have been limited supply of gasoline, of course, and people just were kind of using this, and then people realized that there is not enough gas for them.
yeah,
So this is undesired consequence in the very eyes of the very same people that chose this. They didn't want that, They wanted for the people to have a better life, to have a less pricey gasoline, But what happened is that the gasoline ran out, and there is not enough gas in Hungary. At least it wasn't last year around this time.
yeah. It's an important point that often the interventions that governments take are inadequate or completely off the mark. They often just miss completely because there's more variables. They're usually trying to attack one variable in a problem when it's a multifaceted problem, and you're just not gonna fix a problem only focusing on one aspect and not taking into consideration everything else that's going on. So to go back a little bit to the Austrian school, Austrian economists believe that there should be something backing the currency, something fixed, correct?
Yes, basically, they advocate for preferably the gold-backed currency because gold has been chosen as the primary money throughout the history for the past 5,000 years, and it was only governments in the 20th and 19th centuries that abolished the gold as money. In the 20th
Yeah,
century, money nowadays is just paper. It's just money because the government said so. Even though central banks have some reserves of gold, this is not enough gold to back the currency by any means.
yeah,
So, yeah, either gold and in the past year also Bitcoin has become quite popular. Bitcoin, there are some economists that believe that we need to have something hard, something tangible like gold. It's been called sound money because gold, when you uh, smash gold on something, it makes sound. It was sound money.
yeah,
So
yeah,
some economists don't believe that Bitcoin should be sound money because basically it exists only on servers or something like that. You can't touch that. And yeah,
yeah,
for example, Peter Schiff, prominent Austrian thinker, economist, and investor, is saying the same thing. Money should have more uses than just money. You can, if you don't want to pay with gold as money, you can choose other alternative uses for that. It gets used in jewelry, uh, industrial uses, and so on. you know so his main concern, and for people like him, their main concern is that Bitcoin doesn't have these kind of uses, alternative use for Bitcoin, let's say. Yeah, it's just a question of could Bitcoin be used for something else than just money, I would say.
I think Bitcoin does have some drawbacks to it. The physical aspect can be a positive and a negative. Like, if you have to flee your country and you have a bunch of gold, it's going to be really hard to get out of the country with a bunch of gold. But if you have Bitcoin, you can remember your seed phrase and go somewhere else with the internet and have your money. So there is a benefit to the digital aspect. I had a former coworker. We were working for a software company, and he didn't like the idea of Bitcoin, and he said it's not real. And I thought it was a really interesting take because I'm like, we work for a software company. It's as real as the software you support. It is software, like it's code. That's all we're working for. We're working for a company that has a product that's just code. It's That's all it is. It's not something physical. And I just thought it was interesting that somebody who works for a software company wouldn't recognize the parallel between Bitcoin and the software that he supports. Do you have a personal view on Bitcoin at all?
Uh, yes, but since I don't know many technical details about this kind of thing, I'm not sure that my view is the correct one, because I tend to incline more to the views of Peter Schiff and other people about Bitcoin, because maybe it's because I know too little details about Bitcoin itself. I Maybe I don't
Yeah.
know how exactly it works. I tried to learn about this. I think I know about like 90% of its workings, but I also understand the concern of other people like Peter Schiff, that it's not something that you can touch. Maybe the best the main the main argument of the of Peter Schiff is like, once you shut down the internet or something like that, where do you have that Bitcoin? Is it in your
Yeah.
wallet, like gold can be? Is it in your vault? What can you do with Bitcoin once the internet gets shut down or something like that?
It's a very valid argument. I've heard somebody make an argument still in favor of it having some utility in that case, but I can't remember what it is. I think the best thing to do is to have a little bit of both, right? Like to have some gold, have some silver, whatever you want to have, and to have Bitcoin. Like it's always good to diversify your portfolio. And yeah, you want to cover your bases for everything. But regardless of what your view on Bitcoin is, I think fiat is fiat money, central banking is just horrible. Like if you take if you have a nation who is looking at the prospect of going to war and they all their currency is in physical gold and they take an honest look of that and say, well, it's going to take about half of our gold to go into this war. That's a lot to give up to go to war. But when you have money that can just be printed, what they're doing, what governments that go to war and print money for that war are doing is they're still, or so to go back, they have the gold as far as the population is concerned. They're going to have to take the gold from the population in the country. But if they're just printing the money, what they're going to do is they're still going to take the gold from you, take the money from you ultimately. They just do it later. They're printing money now, and then they're charging you for it with inflation over the coming years. So the people of the nation are paying for the war either way. And it, I see inflation as essentially theft from people. And one of the things about inflation is it screws over poor people more than anybody. Like the people who hurt from inflation, monetary inflation, are poor people. Like the people who own houses, own a lot of property, own a lot of physical assets, they do just fine when there's high inflation because all of their assets rise. Like those prices get inflated. So if you own, an apartment complex or something like that, as inflation goes up, the value of that apartment complex goes up with that inflation. But if you're somebody who wants to save up for your first house and all you have is a bank account with money in it, you are trying to climb out of quicksand essentially because the money is devaluing often faster than you can accumulate it. Am I wrong there?
You're totally right. Yeah, that's basically that. That's basically the case with inflation. Once you have at least some assets, you know, the value of these assets, like real estate, like maybe gold, and also Bitcoin and other non-monetary assets that you can have, the value of these assets rises when there is price inflation. Whereas the value of your money, the value of the money diminishes, you know, and when you get, the more you are poorer, the less assets you own, basically. You just own cash, you just own your bank account, and the value of these kind of things just diminishes very, very quickly. Whereas the the more richer you get, You maybe own more houses, more, you have more options to hedge against inflation, basically. That's why
Yeah.
inflation is such a big socioeconomic problem. And I think so. I think media should be covering this and speaking about this more. It's just so devastating for the poor people, whereas the rich people can sometimes benefit with price inflation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you are completely right, and I would just like to return to what you were saying about war and printing money. Exactly. The American Senator Ron Paul said that it is no coincidence that the century of total war coincided with the century of where central banks were created. Central banks can print money. Government can use this new printed money to go to war you know, and the war lasts more than it should last, basically.
Well, they're charging your children for the war, right? Like if you have children, they're charging your future self and future generations for the war that they want to have right now.
Exactly. Once you choose short-term thinking, short-term policies, your kids will pay the price, basically. Governments nowadays want to tend to their citizens' votes. They want to grab votes. They promise all kinds of things. Higher pensions, higher social security, and more of this stuff. And for this, it prints money, and there's going to be price inflation. And also the debt accumulates rapidly, and who is going to pay off this debt? Many economists are saying that it's not a big issue, but I think it's a big issue. Yeah, definitely, because there is going to be someone that needs to pay off the current debt. Why? Why should the government choose to tax the people if the debt doesn't matter? You know, if the debt
Yeah.
doesn't matter, then don't tax the people. Just print the money, basically.
Yeah, in the US, I'm sure it's probably similar in the European Union, but in the US, a lot of people don't actually know what their taxes are used for. They think that, okay, so we have a social program and your taxes are paying for the social program, but what taxes are actually paying for is the government borrows money from the Fed, and then the taxes go to pay off just the interest on the money that they're taking out. They're not even trying to pay down the principal at all. So they're basically relying on an ever growing pile of debt. Like the pile of debt just keeps growing bigger. And in the US, I think this year we almost defaulted on that, meaning that we weren't going to be able to pay all the interest. And then what they do is they essentially kind of refinance to a certain degree. They change the terms a little bit so that they can pay off the interest, but eventually the interest is just going to keep rising because the principal keeps rising. So the only way that they can continue paying off the interest on that is to somehow take more money from people. So they're going to have to raise taxes continuously through the years to maintain this bullshit system, essentially. And eventually, I think the end result of all fiat money is zero. Like the German mark is a great example of what happens to fiat money. And the current system is built to prop up itself, the current system. So they try to make it seem like everything is okay, but I don't think the reality aligns with that. I think it's a house of cards that eventually falls down.
Definitely. Definitely, the current system is reliant on that. Basically, the the world economy is reliant on ever more debt. Basically, yeah. And for that, let's take the U.S. as an example. The U.S. needs uh, as as low interest rates as possible to be able to paying off the debt, basically. If the
Yeah.
interest rates rise, then it's becoming more difficult to pay off this debt, basically. Yeah, it can get to a point
Yeah.
where it defaults, and the currency becomes worthless. That would be really horrible thing for not only Americans but for the whole world. I think everyone that is holding American debt would, it will become worthless. It's a really the house of cards, as you said, basically. And taxes are just a check on price inflation. You know, the governments and central banks cannot afford to just print infinitely. There needs to be some point where they just cannot do that, or the currency becomes worthless. And every fiat currency in in the past has indeed become worthless in some point of time. Basically, dollar has been very resilient, I think, because the US is like a superpower. The military, the US military is the biggest thing in the world. They really can say that we are the best. We can say the dollar is backed by uh, military power of the US. I think.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, yeah,
And oil to some degree.
yeah,
Like we have oil contracts. We have other countries convert their currency to US dollars to buy oil. And that that system is currently at risk too. Like there are other countries that are challenging that. China, Russia, um, they're they're challenging that to have oil contracts be able to be in their currency, in the yuan, I think is Chinese currency.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean it's backed by military might, and I think that only gets you so far. I mean, people have short-term memories, but like the US dollar hasn't been in place since the US became the US. Like we've had other currencies in the US and all of those failed too.
Exactly. It can get you only so far. Yeah, like you said, and this system is currently at risk because there are many countries that that are now realizing that this system is not the most beneficial to them. They are trying to uh, shake off their dollars. They are trying to find alternative ways to engage in the world trade, and I think these kind of pressures will become a real threat to the US, I would say. Yeah, because once enough people in the world decide that they don't want to hold the dollars, the US cannot do anything. I think when we get to this point, not even military power would stop this. I would say, but
Yeah.
we need to realize that this is not easy because the these kind of things tend to stick, you know. So I think it would take such a big radical shock to get to this point, basically.
Yeah, and I think you see certain countries adopting things like Bitcoin or wanting to go to like a gold reserve or a gold backed currency. You see that in El Salvador. Argentina just elected somebody who seems to be more in line with that. And it'll be interesting to see things play out over the coming years. So, are you familiar with the fourth turning at all?
The fourth turning. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you mean.
Yeah, so they're I can't remember the authors' names. One of them is no longer alive, and the other is still. They are generational. They study generations, and there are cycles of history that they believe repeat themselves. And there's four turnings in each cycle. And we're currently, according to their theory, in the fourth turning right now. So if you look at they kind of focus on US history, but it affects the whole world too. So if you look at it it's basically, I'm not gonna like repeat this in the best way possible, but it's generational in the sense that we lose the wisdom of prior generations at a certain point. Like the people who fought in World War II, there's very few of them left anymore. You know, my grandfather fought in World War II. Like he's gone. He died 10 years ago now. And most people of that generation, the people who fought in that war, the people who understand what a world war is like, are mostly gone at this point, um, except for like a few remaining people. And if you look at the history of the US, 1776 was the American Revolution. So that was a major war. If you move forward another 80 years, you have the Civil War in the US, another major war. If you move forward another 80 years, you have World War II. Then if you move forward another 80 years, you're today. It's what's going on right now. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a war, but there's some major event, according to that theory, that something major is going to happen in the world to completely change how things are, disrupt the order, make things. There's going to be a crisis. It's a crisis. It could be a war. It could be a financial crisis, major financial crisis. They said that I think Neil Howe is the one who's living, and he basically said that the 2008 financial crisis wasn't the fourth turning. That wasn't quite what it is. It was a precursor to it, but it makes me wonder if, we are about to see a global war, something major that is going to shake up the system. And I really don't like war. I think it's a horrible thing. It's one of the worst things humans engage in. So I'd prefer not to see a war. But if you look at geopolitics right now, it kind of looks like that's where things are headed, unfortunately. But you've never heard of that fourth turning?
Actually, something comes to my mind actually about this, but not specifically as to these specific things that happened. So yeah, it makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. It makes a lot of sense. And when you look nowadays at the current situation, I'm kind of surprised myself that there hasn't already been some kind of a major thing. So I
Yeah.
think there is a high probability that something will happen. Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
some months ago, last year, I thought that in 2023 we would have a big global recession, which didn't happen, basically. So I'm still surprised that uh, things are kind of still working out, even though poorly. But I think this can stop in any time. Some some major thing can happen that will influence all the other things. Same
Yeah.
with the current war in Ukraine. I don't think I don't think many people were expecting this. The majority of
Yeah.
people, were taken by surprise that this happened. So I think that this kind of thing can happen again. Yeah, for sure.
You border Ukraine and Slovakia, so what has that been like? What are the repercussions that neighboring countries are seeing? I mean, obviously, you are probably seeing goods and supplies be a little bit less, or a little bit harder to find. Ukraine is considered the breadbasket of the world. They're a major exporter of grain. What is that like being in Slovakia right next to Ukraine?
Basically, the main thing that changed is that you can see more and more Ukrainians in Slovakia nowadays. But concerning the food supply, I wouldn't say that um, that we are like feeling the consequences of this kind of thing. Of course, the price inflation and the restriction of grain, is felt throughout the world and also in our country. But other than that, it just feels normal, I would say.
Mm,
So when
yeah.
of course, there are more discussions about these kind of things, about helping, whether to help or not in Ukraine. But other than that, life moves on, I would say. Yeah.
With healthcare, the US healthcare system is jacked up. Like we need something different, and there are I don't know the answer to what we need. I'm very skeptical of relying on government to solve things. I don't trust government at all. And I think when you give government power, it tends to make things worse. I mean, sometimes it can make things better in certain regards. I'm not going to deny that. But you guys are on like a universal healthcare system, right?
Yes, that's true.
Most things are state owned. How does that work out? What are the benefits that you see, and what are the negative aspects to that?
Well, it's really hard to point to benefits of these kind of systems because
Hmm,
once you have universal healthcare, once you have the state providing for healthcare, you get less of the services. The healthcare may be less expensive than it would be on free market. That's true in short term, but you just get less and worse qualities of services, basically. I think it's just, healthcare is just so complicated, or it portrays itself as complicated because of the state involvement.
yeah.
But I would totally suggest less state, less government intervention into the healthcare, more free market providers. And even though this kind of thing would jack up the prices in the short term on free market because everybody would be trying to get rich quick, in the long term, the competition process would work, would totally work, and bring the prices down actually.
Yeah.
And we would, in the long term, we would have even less expensive healthcare than is nowadays, and of more quality services, basically. This, I think, applies also to the US, to the all the other countries in the world. Yeah.
Are there like long lines, wait times to get healthcare?
Oh yeah, totally. Once you sign up for a surgery or some kind of other procedure, basically, on average, you need to wait weeks and months to get the treatment that you need. There are long wait times, and just basically short supply of doctors, nurses. Once the state involves in healthcare, it messes up the price system of all the things and wages and all the other prices. You know,
Yeah.
basically Slovakia, um, 20% of Slovakian doctors are practicing abroad, which is like
Yeah.
a big number and one of the highest numbers in OECD countries. And why? Because if they practiced in Slovakia, they would meet with less wages, lower quality of equipment. The hospitals, the buildings are old, bad looking, and so on. So, yeah, I would say that it would take a big reform to change things, and basically more more free market, of course.
Yeah, in the US, we have I don't want to call healthcare a free market in the US. I don't think it is. I think in the US, we have insurance companies have way too much power and influence over our healthcare, and I think it's not for the best. Like, if I'm going to a doctor just for a checkup, that should be between me and my doctor, not a health insurance provider. Like, insurance to me is like you're paying a little bit of money for insurance for when things get expensive and out of control so that you're not left with hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay in healthcare costs, not for fixing the price for like a simple doctor visit or a dentist visit. Like I think they just make everything more expensive at that point. But I don't have the answers on it. I I'm very open to
Yeah.
I want to, talk to other people who understand the US healthcare industry and have answers because I think it's a major problem for the US. Like in the US, you can have a medical issue and it can destroy you financially if you're not covered. And I think it's horrible. Like I don't think relying on the government to fix everything is going to be the answer, but what we currently have is definitely not ideal. So I just was curious on your opinion on how things work in Slovakia. So I appreciate the insights there.
Exactly. Look, relying on government is what brought us here. You know,
Yeah,
what started all this mess? At the beginning, there was a belief that healthcare should be a human right, basically.
yeah,
There have been some kind of high-minded rhetoric, empty gestures, and now governments portray themselves as guardians of this human right, right for
yeah,
healthcare, basically. But
yeah,
healthcare, like all the other things in the society, in the economy, it's scarce. It's limited. The doctors
yeah,
are limited. The nurses are limited. All the equipment is limited. So therefore, it needs to be paid for. We need to pay for the services of our fellow citizens. We need to pay for medicine and so on. But many people don't like this, and that's when the government comes. It says to people, "Hey, don't worry, we will take care for you. We will take care of you. We will pay for it." Okay,
yeah,
people will say, "Okay, that sounds good. That sounds fine." What would it take? Well, it would take that the government would be a sole provider of healthcare, would manage all the healthcare providers, insurance companies, and so on. And
yeah,
I'm not the all-knowing person. I'm not saying that my suggestions would 100% help, but exactly the thing that is nowadays so popular, relying on government, is what brought us here. So why not change that and try more free market approach to this kind of thing? And basically, it's the same in Slovakia as in the US, with the main exception that we don't pay such high prices. Of course not. But but we have more. We have worse quality of services. We have higher short time or wait times, longer wait times, and we just pay for this kind of thing through different way, basically.
yeah,
And for example, in Slovakia, you have only three insurance companies. One is state-owned, two other are privately owned, and three companies for the whole healthcare system is just too. It's just not enough. They are acting like monopolies, and is not good. What would help is to bring more competition in the market for healthcare, for sure. Allow allow other healthcare providers to provide healthcare, to provide services, and see if this will help, basically. Yeah.
yeah,
And in the US, I know it's really hard to say, because I wouldn't say that you guys have like free market in healthcare, even though people are saying that in the US you have free market in healthcare, but I wouldn't say so, because there is so much government involvement in this sphere that is we cannot call that free market, basically. Yeah. And when you look at Medicaid, Medicare, those are government programs, basically. So
yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, Dominic, it has been a pleasure talking to you today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Before we wrap up, will you give listeners a way to reach you on social media and follow you, and anything else you want to share before we end the recording?
Yeah, so it's been pleasure talking with you. I really enjoyed that. Yeah, your podcast is amazing. You ask really good questions. You are very well prepared, so I appreciate that. So thank you for having me. I have an Instagram account called Praxecon, Praxecon. So I'm trying to be more active, but life happens, and sometimes I'm just not active on there. But I'm replying to messages, and also in the upcoming months, I'll be trying to translate my book, which is still in only Slovak. I'm trying to translate it to English to also offer it on Amazon. So yeah, that's basically all from my side.
Awesome. Dominik, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you much as well.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Thoughtfully Mindless. If our conversations resonate with you, consider leaving a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your streaming platform of choice. Your ratings help us grow and reach more listeners. Don't hesitate to spread the word about our podcast. It's one of the best ways you can support us. I'm always eager to hear from you, so find me on Twitter at TMConvos or follow us on Instagram at Thoughtfully Mindless for a peek behind the scenes and more thoughtful content. And if you're looking for additional ways to support the show, visit fractalzoo.net, where you can find exclusive t-shirts and apparel. Each purchase contributes directly to the podcast and allows us to keep bringing you content that matters. Thank you once again for lending us your ears. Until next time, stay thoughtfully mindless.